What would you do if your only way to save your family was to marry a stranger in silence and live as if love didn't matter? Claire Whitmore didn't love him. She didn't even know him. But she stood at the altar beside Everett Hale, a cold, unreadable millionaire, and said, "I do, not for herself, but for her father, for the land that raised her, for everything she couldn't bear to lose. No kiss, no vows, just a contract, a marriage built on obligation, distance, and terms carefully signed in ink, not trust." But what if the silence between them wasn't empty, but wounded? What if Everett Hale wasn't incapable of feeling only afraid of it? And if you were Claire, standing in a mansion full of windows but no warmth, would you stay for the deal or leave for the dignity? This is not a fairy tale. It's the slow unraveling of two broken people who never asked for love, but may find it anyway, in the spaces between their rules. If you believe love doesn't always begin with fireworks, but with quiet persistence, please like, share, and subscribe to Shining Stories. Now, let's begin. The first time Claire Whitmore saw the man she would marry, he didn't look at her. He looked past her like she was just a piece of furniture in a room he never chose to be in. The church was cold that day, though it was spring in Montana. Late snow clung to the corners of the windows. Claire's fingers trembled under her gloves, but not from the cold. It was the weight of the moment, the weight of every decision she hadn't had time to make. She wasn't the bride who had been chosen. She was the one who stepped in when the chosen bride ran, and she had only said yes to save everything that mattered. "Claire, we're counting on you," her father had whispered the night before, voice thin, the oxygen machine clicking behind him. "If we lose the land, we lose everything." The Whitmore family farm had been in debt for years. Medical bills, drought, a dozen other things that chipped away at pride, then land, then hope. The offer had come from nowhere. A lawyer in a dark sedan, a contract in hand, and a name, Everett Hale. The enigmatic millionaire known for buying bankrupt tech companies and turning them into gold or ash. He had been set to marry Madeline Rhodes, daughter of a senator. It was a strategic match, arranged by power brokers and estate lawyers. But 24 hours before the ceremony, Madeline vanished. Claire, a childhood acquaintance of Madeline's, quiet, composed, and in the wrong place at the right time, was offered the strangest proposal of her life. Step in, say the vows, pretend, and in return, your family's debt disappears. She had wanted to scream no, but sometimes, love for your family makes you do things your own heart isn't ready for. Now, standing in front of an altar in a gown she didn't choose, opposite a man she'd never spoken to, Claire forced her breath to slow. She looked at Everett. He still didn't look at her. He stood tall, shoulders squared, his face unreadable, cold, efficient. She'd seen him in the news tech conferences, billion-dollar acquisitions, silent gala appearances. They called him the Quiet King. Some called him ruthless. Others called him a genius. He simply nodded at the officiant. "I do," he said, like he was signing off on a quarterly report. Claire's throat tightened. "I do," she said softly, nearly swallowing the words. The ceremony ended in under 10 minutes. No music, no celebration, no kiss. Everett offered her his arm mechanically, as if escorting a client through a meeting, not a bride from her own wedding. They exited through the side doors of the chapel. Snow was falling again. A sleek black car waited. Inside, silence wrapped around them like a second set of vows. Claire folded her hands in her lap and looked out the window, watching Montana's wide fields blur past. "I understand this wasn't your first choice," Everett said finally. His voice was deep, crisp, polished by prep schools and boardrooms. Claire turned slowly toward him. "You mean being your wife?" "No," he said, not missing a beat. "I meant wearing off the rack." It took her a moment. Then she laughed quietly. A dry, breathy sound. "You know," she said, "for a man who doesn't talk much, you're surprisingly sharp." Everett glanced at her for the first time. "I find sarcasm tedious, but I appreciate accuracy." That was the first time she saw it a flicker behind his eyes. Not warmth, not emotion, but maybe Memory. He looked away just as quickly. I assume you were briefed on the contract, he asked. Claire nodded. No physical expectations. Shared residence for public events. 1 calendar year. Correct, Everett said. You'll move into Halecrest tomorrow. My assistant will arrange your transition. I expect discretion. You'll get it, Claire replied. I'm not interested in playing pretend more than I have to. He didn't answer. Instead, he pulled a tablet from his coat pocket, already swiping through spreadsheets. Claire turned back toward the window, her reflection faint against the glass. She thought of her father, his worn hands, the lines on his face that deepened with every failed harvest. This wasn't a love story. It was an act of survival. Still, some part of her whispered, what kind of man marries a stranger without asking why she said yes? Claire Whitmore wasn't naive. But as the car curved toward the airport, toward the beginning of something she hadn't planned, she wondered, what exactly had she just agreed to? Claire Whitmore had never seen a house with so many windows and still felt so dark inside. Halecrest Manor sat on the edge of a pine-covered cliff outside Seattle Glass. Steel, silence. From a distance, it looked like a sculpture. Up close, it felt like a museum built for someone who forgot what warmth meant. Claire stood at the edge of the marble foyer, her boots echoing faintly across the high-ceilinged space. No welcome mat, no soft light, no scent of coffee or bread, only symmetry and control. A woman in a navy blue pantsuit approached, late 30s, hair tied back so tightly it seemed to resist movement. I'm Victoria, Mr. Hale's executive assistant. I'll show you to your room. Not welcome. Not congratulations. Claire nodded, adjusting the strap of her canvas bag. It looked absurd in a place like this. She knew too soft, too ordinary. She held it anyway, like armor. They passed through a corridor lined with minimalist paintings, gray and blue, and nothing in between. At the far end, a door opened into what Victoria called the North Wing Guest Suite. Guest, not wife. Inside was a bedroom the size of Claire's entire family home, polished wood floors, cream-colored sheets that didn't look slept in. A small note on the dresser read, allergies, dietary needs preferences, please list and return. Claire set down her bag and turned to face the woman. Does he actually live here? She asked softly. Victoria blinked. Mr. Hale travels often, but this is his primary residence. Claire looked around. Doesn't feel lived in. Victoria offered a clipped smile. That's by design. With that, she left. Claire stood in the quiet, her breath catching against the echo of her own footsteps. She walked slowly to the large bay window. Outside, the forest blurred into mist. She opened her bag and gently lifted out the small cactus her mother had given her years ago. Geraldine. It had survived 3 moves, a winter frost, and a tumble off the porch. She placed it on the windowsill, where at least something might grow. Dinner wasn't offered. Claire assumed that was also by design. She wandered into the kitchen around 8, following the faint glow of under-cabinet lighting. The fridge was stocked, everything labeled, everything perfect. She poured a glass of water and turned, and nearly dropped it. Everett Hale stood in the doorway, sleeves rolled up, a file in one hand. He didn't speak, just studied her like he was recalibrating something. I wasn't sure if food was allowed, Claire said, voice steady, didn't want to mess up the aesthetic. Everett blinked once. You live here now, within reason. You can eat. Generous of you, she replied, lifting the glass in a mock toast. Thanks. He walked to the island and set down the file. I've reviewed the remainder of the contract. You'll be added to my insurance. My financial team has arranged a separate account with monthly disbursements for personal expenses. Use it however you wish. Claire nodded slowly. Do I get a key, or do I scan a retina? He tilted his head, almost amused. I'll have one made. A beat passed, then another. Claire shifted her weight. Is this where we set ground rules? Everett rested a hand on the granite counter. No physical expectations, no emotional entanglements, public unity, private independence. She raised an eyebrow. And if someone asks why we got married, they won't. And if they do, he considered this. Say it was quick. Say it was private. Say whatever you like, so long as it isn't untrue. Claire stared at him. You know, most people write vows, she said. You wrote terms. Everett met her eyes, and for the first time, his voice softened just a shade. I write what I can keep. Claire didn't answer. She walked to the fridge, pulled out a container of strawberries, and popped one into her mouth. Silence stretched again. Then she said, without turning, I don't break things that aren't mine. Everett looked up, including people. She added, their eyes locked. Something flickered between them. He nodded once. Understood. Claire turned back to her room, strawberries in hand. As she walked away, she didn't look back, but she didn't feel invisible, either. Later that night, she sat on the bed, feet tucked under her, reading the fine print of the contract. It was thorough, clean, fair, which made it even colder. She glanced at Geraldine, still on the windowsill. I hope you like filtered sunlight, sweetheart. Because this place doesn't do warmth. She reached for her phone and texted her best friend Rachel Monroe. 4 words. I'm officially Mrs. Robot. Rachel replied instantly. On a scale of 1 to Fahrenheit 451, how cold is he? Claire smiled, just barely. She didn't reply. Not yet. Because the truth was, she wasn't sure if Everett Hale was cold, or if he'd simply forgotten what it meant to feel anything at all. Claire woke up the next morning not to sunlight, but to silence. It wasn't the peaceful kind. It was the kind of silence that pressed in on your chest and asked you quietly not to disturb it. The room was warm, but the air felt cold. She wrapped herself in a sweater and padded barefoot through the halls of Halecrest Manor. The estate, though gleaming and expansive, felt like a gallery no one truly lived in. Everything was too perfect. No stray books on the coffee table, no throw blanket draped on a couch, no framed photos on the walls, not even a misplaced coffee mug on the counter. Claire paused at a glass wall overlooking the forest. The trees swayed in early spring wind, but inside, not a single thing moved. That stillness, it was beautiful, but it also felt lonely. She made her way to the kitchen, no sign of Everett, just a perfectly programmed coffee maker that beeped when she walked in, like it knew her arrival was scheduled. As she poured herself a cup, she noticed a file folder placed neatly beside the fruit bowl, weekly appearance schedule. A typed itinerary listed charity dinners, board luncheons, and an art gala in downtown Seattle. Her name appeared next to his on 3 of them. Public spouse presence requested, not wife, not partner, just presence. She stared at the words. They didn't sting, but they didn't sit well. Either. Later that day, she wandered into what looked like Everett's study. The door wasn't locked. Dark wood shelves lined the walls, dozens of books, most on engineering, finance, negotiation, and human behavioral science. Not a single novel, except one. Tucked almost deliberately out of place was a worn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. She pulled it down slowly, flipping through the dog-eared pages. Inside, a small card fell out. You never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view. Atticus Finch. It wasn't underlined. It was boxed in blue ink. Claire blinked. Somehow, that surprised her more than if it had been a love letter. Everett Hale, the calculated, the efficient, boxed a quote about empathy. That evening, they crossed paths in the hallway. Claire had just come from the solarium, where she was trying to revive a few dying succulents. Geraldine, thankfully, was thriving in the corner. Everett was in a crisp gray sweater and slacks, holding a tablet. He paused when he saw her. Dinner is served in the east dining room, he said simply. Claire hesitated. You eat. His mouth twitched, occasionally. She followed him down the corridor. The dining room was all angles and stone. The table seated 16. Only 2 places were set. A bowl of tomato bisque sat steaming beside a loaf of rustic bread. Everett sat first, cutting the bread with quiet efficiency. Claire sat opposite, waiting. He noticed, You're not eating. I was taught not to eat until the host does, she said mildly. I'm not hosting, he replied. Exactly. A pause. Then he reached for his spoon. They ate in near silence, except for the occasional clink of silverware. Finally, Claire broke it. "Did you read To Kill a Mockingbird in school?" Everett's eyes flicked up. "I read it every year until I was 21. She raised an eyebrow. "Didn't peg you for a ritual reader." He studied her for a moment. "It was required at boarding school. Then I started reading it by choice. Because he took a sip of wine. Because it was the only book that didn't try to teach a lesson by force. It let you discover it." Claire leaned back, watching him. "That's a surprising answer. You assumed I wouldn't like literature. I assumed you wouldn't let it in." Everett didn't reply right away. Then he said, "Assumptions make comfort possible, but they also make people invisible." That was the first time she heard regret in his voice. Soft, barely there, but real. Later that night, Claire stood by the window in her room, her reflection faint against the forest. Her phone buzzed. Rachel Monroe. "So, on a scale of 1 to Mr. Darcy, how brooding is our Ice King?" Claire smiled, typing back, "Somewhere between an iceberg and a locked door that wants to creak." He quoted To Kill a Mockingbird over soup. "I think he might be human." She set her phone down and turned toward Geraldine. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves," she whispered, then softer, to herself. "But what if there's more under all that silence than anyone ever bothered to ask about Claire, never imagined that something as small as a shoelace could tell her a story?" It happened on a Tuesday morning, the kind that looked more like November than April gray sky, a fine drizzle falling across the wide windows of Halecrest Manor. She was halfway down the corridor, heading toward the kitchen, when she noticed her left boot was untied. She crouched down to fix it, her fingers, stiff from the morning chill, fumbled with the laces. A shadow passed in front of her. Then, a hand sure and precise reached down and tied the knot with quiet efficiency. She looked up. Everett was already standing. He didn't say anything. Neither did she. But that knot held all day. Later, she found a mug sitting beside the espresso machine. Ceramic, matte green, inside black coffee, a single teaspoon of honey. No cream. Just how she liked it. She hadn't told anyone, not even Victoria. Certainly not Everett. But there it was, waiting. Claire picked it up slowly and brought it to her lips. It was perfect. Not hot enough to burn, not cold enough to dull. Just quietly thoughtful. And she didn't know what unsettled her more, the fact that he knew, or the fact that it warmed her more than it should have. That evening, Claire sat on the back patio, wrapped in a knit blanket, watching the fog roll in over the cliffs. The sound of pine trees whispering through wind filled the air, soft and rhythmic. She heard footsteps. Everett stood behind her, hands in his coat pockets. "You're not cold?" he asked. She turned her head. "I grew up in Montana. This is practically summer." He didn't smile, but his gaze lingered. "You don't talk much," she said, not unkindly. "I talk when there's something to say." She looked back out over the forest. "I used to think silence was comfortable, until I started living in a house where it echoed." A pause. Then Everett sat in the chair beside her. It startled her more than if he had touched her. He didn't speak, just sat there, eyes fixed on the dark horizon. Minutes passed, and then, quietly, he asked, "Do you miss it?" She turned. "What?" "Your old life." Claire hesitated. "Yes," she said, "and no." He glanced at her. "I miss the smell of soil after rain, the way the sky looks when it's about to snow. I miss the sound of the windmill creaking behind the barn." She paused. "But I don't miss worrying if we'll lose it all tomorrow." He was silent. "And you?" she asked. "Do you miss anything?" Everett looked down at his hands, folded neatly in his lap. "I miss when I didn't know how fragile things were." Claire waited. "I used to believe that control could keep things safe," he added. "Then I watched everything fall apart anyway." He didn't say what everything was. He didn't have to. Grief had a tone. It vibrated beneath the skin like a second pulse. She recognized it. The next day, Claire spent her morning in the solarium. The house staff, quiet and professional, had begun referring to it as Mrs. Hale's room. It made her flinch every time, but she didn't correct them. She was repotting a spider plant when Victoria appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Hale asked me to inform you," she said. "You're invited to accompany him to the Westbridge Gala on Friday." "Invited?" Claire asked, brushing dirt from her fingers. Victoria nodded. "He believes your presence will be advantageous." Claire raised an eyebrow. "For him, for both of you." That night, she found a garment bag hanging on her closet door. Inside, a navy blue gown, classic cut, modest shimmer, elegant, without being flashy. A small note was tucked into the hanger. "You'll need something suitable for Friday." No signature, no warmth. But still, he had chosen something she would have picked for herself, and that she couldn't explain. She held the fabric between her fingers, letting it fall like water through her hands. For a man who spoke in contracts, Everett Hale was beginning to communicate in details. That night, she texted Rachel again. "He tied my shoelace today." "You mean metaphorically?" "No. Literally, just walked by, knelt down, and tied it, like it was completely normal." "Did he propose after Claire smiled?" "It was probably just efficient. He hates loose ends." She paused, then typed again. But it felt like something else. Like maybe he's not trying to stay cold. Maybe he's just afraid of thawing. She set the phone down, and for the first time since she arrived at Halecrest, she fell asleep without needing the hum of music to keep the silence away. The Westbridge Gala was everything Claire hated about high society. Too much sparkle, too little sincerity. Held at the rooftop ballroom of a downtown Seattle museum, it dripped with carefully curated elegance, black tie formality, string quartets, and small talk that sounded more like resumes being recited in formal wear. Claire stood at the top of the grand staircase, Everett at her side. She felt like a piece of set dressing. But Everett didn't touch her, didn't look at her, not until the camera flashes began. Then, his hand came to rest gently on the small of her back. His palm was warm, steady. It wasn't possession, it was positioning. They descended the steps like royalty, silent, symmetrical, practiced. "Smile," Everett murmured, not looking at her. "It photographs better." Claire smiled, not too wide. Not too soft, just believable enough to make people believe this was real. Inside, the ballroom was a sea of tuxedos and tailored gowns. Everett guided her with the ease of someone used to navigating powerful rooms. He leaned in just enough to speak without being overheard. "Names you need to know are Harrington, Voss, and McLaren. Everything else is noise." Claire tilted her head slightly. "You ever just meet people I assess?" He replied. "Same thing." "No," he said, "but I understand the confusion. It wasn't rude. It was practiced, like everything else about him." A tray of champagne passed. Claire took a flute. Everett didn't. "You don't drink, I calculate," he said. "Tonight's risk-benefit ratio doesn't warrant impairment." Claire bit back a smile. "You make romance sound like a spreadsheet." He finally glanced at her, the corner of his mouth twitching. "You make spreadsheets sound tolerable." They mingled. To Claire's surprise, Everett was charming in a strangely mathematical way. Precise, polished. He made people feel important without promising anything. She began to understand why they feared him, not because he raised his voice, but because he never had to. Then came the moment she didn't expect. A society reporter, mid-50s, sharp eyes, clipboard in hand, approached them just as Claire was sipping her second glass of champagne. "Mr. Hale." "Mrs. Hale," she said. "A few questions for the society column." Claire opened her mouth, but Everett beat her to it. "Of course," he said, turning toward Claire. "My wife's the eloquent one." The word wife hit harder than she expected. The reporter smiled. "How did you two meet?" Claire hesitated for only a breath. "Through a friend," she said smoothly. "It was very unplanned." "Love at first sight?" the reporter asked, pen poised. Before Claire could answer, Everett stepped closer. His voice dropped just enough to feel private, but still clear. "She challenged me," he said simply. "That doesn't happen often." Claire looked up at him, startled. He wasn't smiling, but he wasn't performing either. The reporter beamed. "And now, married so quickly. When you know," Claire said quietly, "you know." The woman scribbled, delighted. They posed for a photo. Everett's arm slipped around her waist. Her body responded before her brain could. She leaned into him. And for just one flash, just one camera click, it felt real. Later that night, in the back seat of the car, Claire sat with her hands folded in her lap. The dress still shimmered faintly under the cabin lights. Her heels sat discarded beside her. Everett was quiet, staring out the window. "That line you gave the reporter," she said, "about me challenging you." He didn't turn. "It wasn't a line," he said. Claire blinked. "You never say things you don't mean. I rarely say things I do," he replied. She looked at him for a long moment. "You're full of contradictions. I'm full of algorithms." She tilted her head. "And yet you picked out a gown that made me feel like myself." He finally turned toward her. "Because I read people." "No," Claire said gently. "You observe people. There's a difference." A pause. Then, quietly, "Maybe you're teaching me the rest." He didn't answer, but she noticed something soften in his eyes. Just for a second. Back at Halacrest. Claire changed into pajamas and padded barefoot into the solarium. Geraldine stood tall in the moonlight, small and unbothered. She sat beside the cactus, toes curled under her, and whispered to the night. "I think I'm in trouble," she said to the plant, "because I almost believed it." She paused. Not the marriage, not the lies. Another breath. But that, maybe, there's a version of this that could have been true. The next morning, Everett passed her in the kitchen. He paused just long enough to say, "You were exceptional last night." Claire looked up from her coffee. "I wasn't pretending," she said. He blinked once, then nodded and walked away. The first thing Claire noticed was the dust. Not much, just a fine layer over the edge of a bookshelf tucked behind a frosted glass door she hadn't noticed before. She had been exploring again. Halacrest, with all its precision, still had hidden corners. This door wasn't locked. Nothing here ever was. Not physically, at least. She pushed it open. The room inside was small, not designed for guests. A reading nook, maybe. But what caught her eye was the box old, cardboard, and utterly out of place. Inside, she found something that didn't belong in Everett Hale's world. A worn leather journal. She opened it and read the first line, scribbled in uneven handwriting. "You're not supposed to envy the dead, but sometimes I do." Claire's breath caught. She flipped a page. "Everett pretends it didn't break him, but I was there. I saw what was left of him after." The entries weren't Everett's. They were from someone named Graham, a brother, maybe a friend. The tone was unfiltered, raw, not the voice of someone living in silence, but someone who had survived it. Claire closed the journal gently, placing it back in the box. She didn't take it with her. Some things deserved to remain where they were found. But that night, she couldn't sleep. Everett noticed the change. Over breakfast, Claire barely touched her toast. Her gaze lingered longer than usual when he passed her the jam. "Something wrong?" he asked. She hesitated. Then, "Did you ever have a brother?" The question hung in the room like smoke. Everett's jaw tightened, his spoon stilled in his coffee. "I did," he said finally. "Graham." Claire waited. "He died 7 years ago." How Everett looked out the window. There was an avalanche. He was hiking alone. She blinked. "You live in spreadsheets. Your brother hiked alone." Everett's voice was quiet. He was everything I wasn't. He didn't offer more, and Claire didn't press. But something in his eyes had fractured. That afternoon, Claire opened a drawer in her own suite, looking for a notebook. Instead, she found a small envelope addressed to her mother's handwriting. Claire's heart skipped. She hadn't seen it before, tucked beneath the lining of the canvas bag she'd brought from Montana. Inside, The letter was short. Claire Bear, if you're reading this, it means you've had to make a hard choice. I know how much you carry that no one sees. I want you to remember that love isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the hand that ties your shoes or learns how you like your coffee. Don't miss it just because it doesn't speak in the way you expect. Claire folded the letter slowly, pressing it against her chest. For the first time since arriving at Halecrest, she cried, not loudly, not broken. Just a quiet, steady release, like thawing ice. That evening, they found themselves in the solarium at the same time. Everett was checking something on his phone. Claire sat near the window, watering Geraldine. "You said Graham was everything you weren't," she said softly. "What did you mean?" He looked up. He was impulsive, emotional, reckless. He believed in things I considered illogical, like love, forgiveness. God. Claire nodded slowly. And you, Everett, leaned back in the chair, setting his phone aside. "I believe in math, logic, measurable variables." Claire looked at him, her voice steady. "You do realize grief isn't measurable, right?" He didn't answer. "I found something today," she added. "A letter from my mom." Everett's eyes flickered. "What did it say? That love isn't always loud?" She replied, "That sometimes it's just knowing how someone takes their coffee." Everett was silent. Then, almost inaudibly, black, 1 teaspoon of honey. Claire smiled. "You remember, I observe," he said. "No," she corrected gently. "You care. You just haven't admitted it yet. Later, in the privacy of her suite." Claire pulled out her journal and wrote for the first time since the wedding. "He lost his brother and buried himself in blueprints. I lost my mother and ran into a contract. Maybe we're both pretending we're still whole." She paused, then added, "Maybe we're not as broken as we think. Just waiting for someone to see the cracks and stay anyway." Claire hadn't planned to overhear the conversation. She had gone downstairs early that morning, hoping for a moment of peace in the kitchen before the day's obligations began. But as she rounded the corner near Everett's study, voices carried sharp, clipped, familiar, Victoria's, and Everett's. "The acquisition is already in process." Victoria was saying, "The parcels near Summit Ridge are part of the full buyout. We can't undo the deal without serious legal complication." Claire froze. Summit Ridge, her hometown. Everett's voice followed, cool and exact. "That land has been leveraged as collateral. The paperwork was signed last month. You'll coordinate the final transfer." Claire stepped into the doorway. "You're buying my family's farm." Both of them turned. Everett's eyes widened slightly, but Victoria, ever composed, took a half step back. Claire Everett began. She held up a hand. "No, I want to hear it. From you." He closed the folder on his desk slowly. "It's not personal. My company handles distressed properties." "Oh, I see," Claire snapped, her voice steady but sharp. "So the land my father broke his back on for 40 years is just a distressed asset, Claire." He said again, quieter. "I didn't know it was yours. I don't handle the field logistics. And yet you know how I take my coffee." Her voice cracked. "Funny how you manage to notice the little things and miss the big ones." Everett said nothing. She turned to Victoria. "Excuse us." The woman nodded and left without a word. Claire closed the door behind her. When she faced him again, her shoulders were square, but her voice shook. "I came here to save that farm. Everett. I understand." "No, I don't think you do. You think understanding is the same as calculating, but this isn't a variable in a spreadsheet. It's my home, my father's life, my entire history." He exhaled through his nose, then walked slowly to the window. "I never would have signed off on it had I known." "But you did sign," she said, cutting him off. "Because that's what you do. You decide. And the rest of us just live with it." He turned to face her. "There's no malice in this. No, there never is," she replied bitterly. "That's what makes you so dangerous." A long silence. Then she said it. "I'm leaving." The words hung in the air between them, solid and irreversible. Everett flinched, Barely, but Claire saw it. He spoke quietly. I don't want you to go. She almost laughed. You didn't even want me here. That's not true. Then tell me why I am. A pause. He didn't answer, and that was the answer. Claire didn't pack much, just her bag, a few clothes, and Geraldine. The staff didn't stop her. Victoria offered to call a car, but Claire declined. She drove herself. As she crossed the bridge out of the city, the silence in the car wasn't peaceful. It was pulsing, alive with questions she didn't want to ask yet. She didn't cry. Not until she pulled into the long gravel driveway of her father's house and saw the porch lights still flickering half-broken, just like always. That was when the tears came. Slow, reluctant, but steady. She sat on the steps and watched the Montana sky shift from gray to gold. No one asked questions, and maybe that was what made it harder. 2 days passed. Claire moved like someone underwater. She cooked, read, walked the perimeter of the property in the early morning, the way she used to as a girl. But she couldn't stop thinking about Everett's face when she said the words. I'm leaving. Not pain, not regret, just resignation, like he had been expecting her to go all along, and that made her angrier than anything else, because she had wanted to stay. She called Rachel on the third morning. I left, she said simply. There was a pause. Do you feel better? Rachel asked gently. No. You feel clearer? No, Claire said again. I feel like I left something unfinished. Well, Rachel said, that's what happens when you care. Even a little. Claire sighed. What if I wasn't just pretending anymore? There was a longer silence this time. Then Rachel said, then maybe it wasn't a contract. Maybe it was the beginning of something real. Claire stared out the window. The fields stretched endlessly beyond the fence line. She'd come home, but she wasn't sure this was where her heart lived anymore. It took Everett 2 days to realize she wasn't coming back, not for a conversation, not for a forgotten item, not even for closure. She was simply gone. The silence inside Hallecrest, once comforting, now rang like an unanswered question. He noticed it first in the kitchen. Her mug matte green, slightly chipped at the handle, was no longer near the sink. The honey was unopened. The espresso machine still blinked the same time, but no one used it. The second thing he noticed was Geraldine. Gone, too. He stared at the empty windowsill like it had betrayed him. He didn't touch the space, didn't fill it. Instead, he closed the solarium door and didn't return. He returned to work. Of course, Everett Hale didn't pause. He advanced. But something had shifted. He sat in meetings without really hearing. He approved proposals he would have flagged 3 weeks ago. Victoria noticed first. You seem distracted, she said one morning, setting a report on his desk. Everett didn't look up. I'm not. You're drinking decaf, she replied flatly. That made him pause. She was right. He stared at the cup. He hadn't even noticed. Have someone refile the Westbridge acquisitions, he said. Victoria arched a brow. You want them reassessed? I want them reversed. Her silence was brief, but heavy. I'll handle it. He nodded once. When she left, he pulled out the contract, the marriage agreement he and Claire had signed. His thumb brushed over her signature. The ink was dark, steady. He hadn't expected her to mean it, but she had. And now the line between a lie and a loss blurred until he couldn't tell which was worse. That night, Everett sat in his study, journal in hand. Graham's journal. He hadn't read it in years. He opened to a random page. I think Ev feels everything twice. Once for real, and once for how it could have been better. That's why he looks so cold, because he's constantly rewriting the moment in his head. Everett swallowed hard. He read more. He told me once that emotions were like untethered power lines. If you don't learn to contain them, they'll electrocute you. But what if some things are supposed to shock you? Isn't that the point? He closed the book, set it aside, and did something he hadn't done in years. He took off his watch, leaned back in his chair, and let the silence settle. Not the kind you arrange, The kind that comes when you finally stop trying to fix everything. Claire didn't text, didn't call, but she didn't have to, because every time Everett walked through a room, he saw her, the chair she always pulled out, the scarf she left on the banister, the half-filled notepad on her nightstand, filled with gentle loops and unfinished thoughts. He picked it up one evening and flipped to the last page. Only 4 words. This didn't feel fake. He closed the notebook with trembling hands, then finally said the words out loud, to no one I didn't want it to. In Montana. Claire sat by her father's porch, watching the wind stir the fields. She thought of Everett more than she wanted to admit. The way he observed the world, even as he tried not to live in it. The way he said little, but meant more than most people who talk too much. The way his fingers had trembled barely when she told him she was leaving. He didn't ask me to stay, she reminded herself, but part of her wondered if maybe he thought she wouldn't go, as if he had trusted her enough to believe she was different, and she had left anyway, not out of revenge, but out of survival. Still, something inside her whispered, what if he's breaking now, and what if you were the only person who would ever see it in Seattle? Rain began to fall. Everett stood on the back patio, unbothered by the weather, hands in his coat pockets. He didn't flinch when the first drops hit. He stayed there, in the storm, long after the sky darkened. Maybe some things did need to shock you, even if it hurt, especially if it hurt. Claire hadn't expected the call. It came just after dawn, a hoarse voice from the local hospital. Her father had collapsed near the barn, a mild heart attack, not life-threatening, but enough to break the fragile rhythm of her stay. She drove in silence, the sunrise melting fog from the fields, the road unwinding like a memory. By the time she reached the hospital, he was stable, awake, even cracking jokes with the nurse. Don't look so scared, he muttered, his voice thin but warm. Not my first tango with a stubborn heart. She smiled, kissed his forehead, and sat beside him. But her hands wouldn't stop trembling. He noticed. You look more shaken than I feel, he whispered. Claire didn't answer, but he saw it in her eyes. You've been carrying too much, Claire Bear, he added, even for someone as strong as you. She swallowed hard. I'm fine. He gave her the same look he used to when she lied about finishing her homework at age 9. Then he said, call him. Claire blinked. What, you know who I mean? Call him. She looked away. Why, because whatever he is to you, he matters. Or he wouldn't have broken your voice just now. She didn't call, but Everett came anyway. He showed up at the hospital just before sunset, his coat still damp from the Seattle rain. Claire saw him from down the hall, standing near the vending machine like he didn't belong, because he didn't. Not here, not in a place where the air smelled like antiseptic and the walls hadn't been painted in 15 years. He saw her, but he didn't smile, didn't step forward. She approached him slowly, arms folded across her chest like armor. What are you doing here? His voice was quiet. Victoria told me. Claire tilted her head. So, this was a business update. No, he said. This was a mistake I didn't want to make twice. She blinked. What mistake? Letting someone I care about leave without telling them how much I care. She stared at him, then laughed, bitter, small. You're not very good at this. I know, he said, but I'm trying. A pause. Then she asked, why didn't you stop me? Because I thought setting you free was the right thing. Everett said softly. But it wasn't freedom. It was cowardice. Claire's voice trembled. Do you even know how to love? Everett, I don't know how to perform it, he said, but I think I know how to feel it now. She looked away. Toward the dim hall, the old linoleum floor. Why now? He reached into his coat pocket and pulled something out. Her notepad, the one she left behind. He handed it to her wordlessly. She flipped to the last page. Her own handwriting stared back at her. This didn't feel fake. She closed the cover slowly. Neither did you, Everett said. They sat in the waiting room for over an hour. No roles, no expectations. Just a man in a dark coat and a woman with tired eyes, sitting in plastic chairs under flickering lights. He brought her a coffee. She drank it silently. He didn't try to hold her hand, but she let her shoulder rest against his, and he didn't move away. Later, outside the hospital, she stood by his car. The sky was black, the parking lot quiet. "You still have a contract," she said softly. "You could have just let it expire." "I didn't want an expiration," he replied. "I wanted a beginning." Claire looked at him, and for the first time, she saw him without the suit, without the money, without the silence. Just a man, flawed, frightened, still healing. "Do you even know what that looks like?" she asked. "I'm learning," he said. She smiled barely. "You'll need help." His voice was steady. "I was hoping it might be yours." She stepped closer. "Not much, just enough. I came here for my father," she said. "But maybe I needed to see if you'd show up for me." "I will," Everett replied. "Every time, now." She touched the lapel of his coat. "It's not a second chance," she said. "It's the only chance." He nodded. And this time, when she leaned in, he met her halfway. The contract was still in Everett's drawer. Claire found it the morning after she returned to Hallicrest. She hadn't planned to open it, only to put away a book. But there it was, that sleek leather folder, perfectly centered in the drawer like a reminder of what they weren't anymore. She opened it. The pages were pristine, initials in the margins, dates, terms, duration 12 months, no physical involvement, shared public appearances, independent personal lives. Claire stared at the final clause. All obligations terminate at the end of the agreement without penalty or expectation. She read it again, then closed the folder and left it where she found it. That night, she joined Everett on the back patio. He was sitting quietly, hands wrapped around a mug. The fog rolled over the cliffs like it was trying to bury the house. She took the seat beside him. No words, not at first, just stillness. Then she asked, "Do you believe people can change?" He didn't answer immediately. "Then I think people stop pretending. That looks like change." Claire nodded slowly. "And are you still pretending?" He looked at her. "Not anymore." "Good," she said. "Because I'm tired of pretending I don't miss you when I leave a room." His expression didn't shift, but his grip on the mug loosened. They sat like that a while longer. Then Everett spoke again. "I want to tear up the contract." Claire blinked. "Really?" He nodded. "But I don't want to be without an agreement." She tilted her head. "You want a new one?" "A real one," he said. "No end dates, no clauses. Just you and me. Figuring it out." Claire gave a soft smile. "You do realize relationships don't come with spreadsheets." He smirked. "Then I'll have to improvise." Over the next few weeks, they rewrote their story. Not with words, but with time. They had breakfast together sometimes in silence, sometimes with laughter. Claire taught Everett how to make scrambled eggs that didn't taste like rubber. He surprised her by learning. They grocery shopped once, in disguise. Everett wore a baseball cap. Claire teased him when he insisted on scanning every barcode himself. They read on opposite ends of the couch. Sometimes feet touched, sometimes they didn't. They didn't rush it, because healing wasn't urgent. It was daily. One afternoon, Claire found Everett in the solarium. He was replanting a pot of lavender. She blinked. "You're gardening, I'm experimenting," he said, wiping soil from his palms. "Victoria says dirt under fingernails builds character." Claire laughed. "And here, I thought you outsourced everything." "Some things," he said, glancing at Geraldine, "deserve personal attention." She stepped beside him and knelt to help. Their hands touched in the soil. Neither pulled away. Everett looked at her and said quietly, "You're not a variable I planned for." Claire smiled, voice soft. "I'm not here to be solved." "Good," he said. "I don't want a solution. I want participation." That night, they cooked dinner together. Claire chopped vegetables while Everett read instructions aloud from a cookbook, his voice calm, steady. They moved like two people building a rhythm, sometimes stepping on toes, sometimes dancing without trying. Afterward, they sat on the floor with plates in their laps, the kitchen warm and messy for the first time ever. "I don't remember the last time this place looked lived in," Claire said. "I don't remember the last time I did either," Everett replied. They clinked glasses, just water, but it felt like a toast to something sacred. Not a beginning, not a conclusion, but a real continuation. Before bed. Claire passed by the drawer. The contract folder was gone. In its place sat two notebooks, one with her name, one with his. Blank pages waiting. Claire couldn't sleep. She hadn't slept well in days, not since Everett had begun to shift from quiet to present, from rigid to real. And yet, something lingered in the air between them, a weight neither one had named. She lay awake, listening to the house breathe. It was no longer cold, but it still wasn't entirely warm. She rose quietly and wandered into the study, where the smell of cedar and paper wrapped around her like memory. Everett had left a lamp on. His notebook was on the desk. Her name was written on the top of a page. She hesitated, then read, "She doesn't ask for anything, but she deserves everything. Every time she leaves a room, I feel it, the absence, like I've just lost something sacred. I want to tell her, but I don't know how to say it without needing to be perfect." Claire pressed her hand to the page, then closed the book. When she turned, Everett was in the doorway. He didn't startle, neither did she. "How long have you known?" he asked. "That you loved me," Claire said softly. "Since the moment you said goodbye without meaning it." He stepped closer. "I tried to give you freedom," he said, "because I thought that's what love meant, and I needed honesty," she replied, "because that's the only thing I can build a life on." Everett's voice trembled for the first time. "I don't know how to love the right way." "There is no right way," she whispered. "There's only your way, and my way, and choosing to meet in the middle." A pause. Then she asked the question he'd never been brave enough to face. "Why didn't you say it?" His jaw tightened. His eyes glistened, but he didn't look away. "Because I'm afraid," he said. "Of what? Of it not being enough. Of saying it, and still losing you." Claire walked forward until they were only inches apart. "Then say it now," she said, "and let me decide." He stared at her, breath shallow. "I love you," Everett said, soft, raw, unguarded. "I've never said that to anyone before." Claire's eyes welled. "You just did." Silence. Then she reached up and touched his cheek. "You're not supposed to say it perfectly," she whispered. "You're supposed to say it honestly." His hand came up to cover hers. No hesitation, no rules. Just him and her, and the fragile, sacred space between two people finally choosing truth over protection. Later that night, they sat on the floor of the solarium. Geraldine stood between them, quietly thriving. Claire rested her head on Everett's shoulder. No words were needed, but she said one anyway. "Stay." Everett didn't answer. He just pulled her closer and stayed. The second time, Claire Whitmore stood in front of Everett Hale, wearing white. The world looked entirely different. There were no photographers, no contracts, no agenda. Just a soft breeze moving through the garden behind Halecrest. The sky painted in the muted gold of early evening, and a handful of people seated in wooden chairs beneath a string of warm lights. Her father, sitting in the front row, nodded once, a small, proud smile on his face. Rachel Monroe dabbed at her eyes beside him and mouthed, "Don't trip." Claire almost laughed. Everett stood ahead, dressed simply in a gray suit, no tie. His hands weren't folded. His posture wasn't perfect. But he looked at her now. He really looked. And in his eyes was every moment that had brought them here, the silence, the mistakes, the almost goodbyes, the truths finally spoken. Claire took a deep breath and stepped forward. They had written their vows separately, but agreed on one rule: no rehearsing. Just speak the truth. Claire went first. "I thought love had to look a certain way," she said softly, her voice carrying in the quiet. Loud, sweeping, predictable. But you showed me that sometimes love is quiet. Sometimes it ties your shoes and remembers your coffee. Sometimes it doesn't speak at all, but it listens." She paused. "And sometimes, love is just choosing the same person every day, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." Everett's hands were steady now. He didn't read from a card. He didn't hesitate. "I didn't know how to be with someone like you," he said. "Someone real, someone brave, someone who didn't need to be rescued, but rescued me anyway, without trying." He looked at her with soft eyes. "You taught me that love isn't a transaction, it's a transformation, and I want to keep changing, with you." The officiant smiled and said the words. They exchanged rings, nothing elaborate, just simple bands that fit perfectly. When the final question came, Everett answered without a pause. "I do," he said, like it meant something now. Claire smiled. "I do," she echoed, and this time, they kissed, not out of performance, not for an audience, just because it was true. The reception was simple backyard tables, mismatched chairs, homemade pies, and laughter that filled the air like music. Claire sat beside Everett, barefoot in the grass, a piece of cherry pie in her lap. "I don't miss the first wedding," she said, voice low. He looked over. "I barely remember it." She smiled. "Good. Later." As guests began to leave, Claire found Geraldine placed gently on a table near the dance floor, surrounded by candles. "She made it," Everett said quietly, coming up beside her. Claire nodded. "She survived you." "That's impressive." He chuckled, a soft, real sound. "I like having her around," he admitted. Claire turned to face him fully. "You're different now," she said. "I'm still learning." He replied. She took his hand. "So am I." They stood there a moment longer. Then he asked, "Do you think this is what a real marriage feels like?" Claire thought for a second. "No," she said. He raised an eyebrow. "It feels better." That night, after the last dish was washed and the lights were dimmed, they lay in bed, facing each other. No words, no tension, just peace. Claire reached out, traced his jaw with her fingertips. "You're not who I married," she said. "Neither are you," Everett replied. She smiled. "Good." He kissed her gently, and as the night wrapped around them, something settled between them. Not a performance, not an obligation, just love. Real, quiet, chosen. Love doesn't always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it walks in quietly, wrapped in misunderstanding, hidden behind fear, and dressed in silence. But when two people choose to stay, to listen, to learn, to unlearn what the world taught them about worth, that's when love becomes something deeper than romance. Claire and Everett's story reminds us we all carry stories, some louder, some buried, and too often. We judge people by how well they speak their love, rather than how bravely they try. But love is not for the loudest. It's for the bravest, those who show up, even when they were never taught how. Let this be a quiet protest against emotional neglect, against the subtle cruelty of dismissing someone because they're different, colder, quieter, or slower to trust. And let it also be a soft reminder, no one heals alone, and no one should have to. If this story touched you, if it made you pause, cry, or feel seen, please like, share, and subscribe to Shining Stories. Your presence here helps us keep telling the stories that heal. We can't wait to bring you the next one.